if I saw another day, only to scream into the night. Nothing ever tries to change, even if I want to realize. 'Cause I've been sitting here, same old ways, taking off without the same mistake. Darling, when you go away, it won't be as simple for you.
Yo guys, it is Old Man G here, back again. I'm joined again by Tom. Oh, sorry, he's literally gone on for a quick phone call, so we'll be back in 2 or 3 minutes. But I am joined with Tom. First of all, welcome everyone to the show. Remember, if you are new to the channel, remember to like, share, and subscribe to Red Devil Studio. Follow us on Twitter. We are United X, and smash the notification button for the latest Manchester United news. Like I say, I'm joined with Tom, but he's literally just had to nip off to just make a quick phone call. And the subject matter of this is Sir Jim Ratcliffe in trouble? Is Sir Jim Ratcliffe in trouble? We're going to be dissecting what the Sir Jim Ratcliffe ineos bid is. There is a few updates around it, and whether or not Sir Jim Ratcliffe's bid in particular is viable, whether there'll be a challenge, whether there'll be an issue with the Glazers and Sir Jim Ratcliffe, teaming up, which might make things difficult and might again point towards a strong advantage for the Qatari bid. But like I said, before we get into it, and while I'm waiting for Tom to come back to take your questions, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Red Devil Studio and follow us on Twitter, etc., etc. Now, while I wait for Tom, who will be here shortly, let me just quickly read some of the comments in the chat, just to greet people on. Shout out to Jamie in the chat, man. Ratcliffe in trouble. I like that title. Lucky Singh, always a member, said who's always there. Appreciate you, buddy. Scott Hutchison, we need to hear something this week regarding because of transfer windows. You're right. We do need to kind of hear something this week. But the reality is, Scott, is that I honestly think that that this is. I've said for a while, and I'm interested to see if Tom can corroborate it, whereby I think, unfortunately, you are going to see the Glazers be in charge of Manchester United Football Club at the beginning of next season. And the transfer window is as it stands, whereby we will go in for the likes of Mount, etc., and then do what we always do, which is spend tons of money, on players towards the ends. That's it really. That's what's going to happen. So that's it. Scott says that everyone needs to think of Ten Hag. He must be mad. Of course. Ten Hag must be incredibly mad about what's going on. And to be honest, I think United fans need to set the expectations. They need to tune their expectations. Basically, they need to tune their expectations. Shout out to England Football Club as well. Lucky Singh says Rashford. Yeah, Rashford glad he is he causing havoc? Was that what you're saying? Or Rashford is a troublemaker? You talking about the new contract with Rashford? We might talk about the regarding transfers, obviously when Tom gets back. So let's have a look. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, I'm back.
Hey, Tom, you back? Oh.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, awesome. No worries, boy. No worries. You're obviously busy. And again, thank you for giving us the time for your attention. So let's basically just get stuck into it. First of all, thanks again for Tom coming back on the show. Let's just get stuck into it. Can you basically, as you kind of updated me today, and obviously for those who want, make sure you like the vid and get your questions in. If you have questions, get them in the comments. We'll try and get them out. But what would you say? What's been obviously the big issue, the big update regarding Sir Jim Ratcliffe and the issues that he might run into regarding his bid in the Glazers, etc.?
Well, the proposal that's been made by Sir Jim Ratcliffe has been described to myself and colleagues as being it's very complicated, not only in terms of the amount of money that he's paying per share, if he was to only want to buy a percentage of it rather than buy all the Glazer family shares, but he also risks raffing a major multi-million, upwards of £1 billion legal battle pursuit against the New York Stock Exchange traders and also against New York Stock Exchange, of whom are backing their traders in terms of their regulations and clauses around what you can do when you want to buy one of their businesses, which is a publicly traded company, via themselves, unless you buy all the shares and then you take it private. And the one thing that we know is that at least one major US hedge fund has major shares in New York Stock Exchange and Manchester United listings. I think roughly they have either 15 or 20% of the shares, and the other shares are just people, your average Joes who have a lot of money that they're willing to invest per your annual share, and they want to buy shares in Manchester United to sell on at a later date. And the update is that the US hedge funds and the stock traders are preparing court orders with the listings of the Glazer family and Sir Jim Ratcliffe's chemical company, Ineos. Now, this is due to Sir Jim Ratcliffe's partial sale being discussed as illegal, in quote, what New York Stock Exchange insiders are quoting upon their guidelines and laws. This is due to the fact that the shareholders who own stocks first, they won't be able to accurately value their shares. And number two, they won't be able to sell their shares on because they won't know the market value of Manchester United. Because if Sir Jim Ratcliffe's proposal was to go through and he doesn't buy all the Glazer families out, then you have a split controlling ownership via the New York Stock Exchange over Sir Jim Ratcliffe's and Ineos and the Glazer family. And from what a friend had told me who works in the New York Stock Exchange and has done for over 5 years, a brilliant guy, he told me that such a proposal was to go through, not to quote him on it because he doesn't know he's not a lawyer, he's not within law and things like that, but you could be totaling lawsuits, as I say, in multi-millions and maybe even, upwards of £1 billion, really, because ultimately the proportion of how this breaks their guidelines and rules, people are going to be losing millions if this goes through. And Sir Jim Ratcliffe in this case will be getting really off of it scot-free, and the New York Stock Exchange are backing their traders.
Yeah.
And this could pursue a worldwide ban from any stock exchange market if Sir Jim Ratcliffe, as we've discussed before, if he wanted to move from New York Stock Exchange to London Stock Exchange, that would have repercussions for if he wanted to do so there. But just to quote a note, this would be, in terms of any lawsuit or liable purse that would be won by any stockholders or the New York Stock Exchange against Sir Jim Ratcliffe, the splits would be between each percentage shareholder, not per shareholder. So therefore, whatever percentage a person accumulates, so say the hedge fund, as I say, has 20%, they will get a 20% cut of whatever the totaling figure is that they would get in a payout, and the money gets split out into the different parties. That's how it would work. But the magnitude of a case like this, it could go on for years, 2, 3, 4 years, and it has significant law fees and penalty expenses from both sides of the argument, not just the stakeholders. You'd have Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who would have a legal team that would be doing his bidding, really. And in any eventuality that a partial sale or a sale, it could be reversed. There could be a re-invokement if this goes to court. The Premier League would most likely get involved under the guidelines of they have to protect Manchester United as a football club now, under how they rule in terms of their laws. And that's the Premier League in terms of the domestic league for which Manchester United is situating. But it also could spark an investigation by UEFA to protect Manchester United from a domestic crisis, also because European football would be impacted if you don't have Manchester United having a clear flagship owner because of the legacy that Manchester United have had, not just in the Premier League, but also in European football. Love it or hate it, they are one of the biggest clubs in Europe. They bring, they bring fans, they bring the money, they bring, they have a big voice in terms of the European football chamber. And the leading member on the board of the ECA, for people quoting, it's the European Club Association, which is headed by PSG's president Nasser Al Khalifa. The regulations that would state there, they would have to get involved and they would have to regulate based upon if they see fit that Sir Jim Ratcliffe is a sustainable owner and Ineos is a sustainable owner in terms of can they fund Manchester United to compete in European football if he's having to fork out millions and potentially even £1 billion in a legal fee and a legal case, because that has repercussions then on Manchester United's affectability as a football club. Can they spend money in the best players? Can they compete to actually get into European competitions? This is the different points that are being made. So all in all, to summarise, the Ineos group and Sir Jim Ratcliffe will face a lot of scrutiny from the Premier League, first and foremost, over using debt to buy Manchester United, and they will want to investigate and have the knowledge of where that was to go to if he was to be selected to go forward. You then also have the intervention of UEFA because himself and Ineos already own a team in Nice, so there would need to be some clarity around what they decide to do with Nice. If they wish to keep it, fine. Manchester United and Nice can never compete against each other, and they would have to be separated by 2 tiers of European competition. So you could have a situation where OGC Nice finish higher in their league than Manchester United, but they both finish in the top 4, for example. And whoever finishes lowest, if Manchester United finished 4th and Nice finished 2nd, Nice automatically go to the Champions League, and Manchester United would have to play Conference League football. Unfortunately, that's just how the guidelines of UEFA work at this time. So
sorry to interrupt there, Tom. So if that's the case, how is it that, for example, the RB group have been able to sort of circumvent that? Because obviously they bought Leipzig and Salzburg, but Salzburg and Leipzig have both qualified for the Champions League and work. How have they been able to circumvent that, if that makes any sense?
There is Todd Bowley will be the expert on there is a loophole, as I say, around the UEFA clauses, and the loophole is essentially in terms of multi-club ownership is barred. You can't have a owner who has 2 domestic teams who want to play in the same European competition. UEFA's guidelines and rules don't allow that at this stage. But what they do allow in terms of what you said about Red Bull in terms of the financing, Red Bull as a brand own Leipzig Football Club and they also own Salzburg. But so long as you have 2 different groups in terms of staff, members, executives, you could have an executive who works in the commercial side of Red Bull as a brand who could run Leipzig. You could have somebody who could work from, let's say, I don't know, the social media side of Red Bull, who could then operate as Salzburg. So long as those 2 don't ever connect as in terms of footballing terms, and money is invested in terms of what they make in their league. So, for example, Switzerland in terms of Salzburg and Germany in terms of Leipzig, the money that they make within their league and they generate is the money that they can then spend in terms of FFP guidelines and in terms of investing in new players. That's why, for example, with Red Bull, recently, they've got rid of a lot of players over the last few years. For example, Nkunku, Haaland. You're probably going to have a situation with Guardiola, who might be going to Manchester City. You've got a lot of different players of whom the Red Bull clubs are openly selling on in terms of that's how they sustainably keep their club going under the guidelines that their leagues regulate, but also UEFA has regulated for them to have the same brand and play in the same European competition. Therefore, the loophole is if you have you can have 2 football clubs, so long as they are operated from separate members in terms of your organization or outside members, which is even better, and you bring in you could bring in a CEO from Mercedes-Benz, you could bring in a director of football from Japan. Like, so long as it's different and there's no links in terms of in terms of, you know, qualification or personality via the two groups, and there is that separation in terms of they run in different directions to each other, then as a joint force together, therefore UEFA pass that they can have the same if you like, a multi-club ownership. But Alexander Sheffer, the UEFA president, has insisted that the guidelines and the rules around multi-club ownership, UEFA are looking at changing so that any owner who owns a team currently right now, so in the same case as Sir Jim Ratcliffe with Nice, if he wants to then own Manchester United, it doesn't affect the football regulations in the club. But as you say, there would have to be some guidelines and scrutiny over it. If Manchester United and Nice met in the same competition, you could tell a team to throw the game. And, you know, it would take a lot. You're going to have to get a manager on side to do it, players, and, you know, you're going to be losing a lot of money for which either of your two teams loses. You're going to lose money. So effectively, there could be a regulation if those two teams ever did meet, but in the scenario of if it does happen and a multi-club ownership changes happen within UEFA's guidelines and regulations, you could have, for example, QSI, if they wanted to buy another football team. There's been links that they wanted to put a minority stake into Tottenham Hotspur. If they wanted to go and buy Tottenham, there's nothing stopping them doing so if they wanted to. And then you just put it under QSI's guidelines in terms of their inner circle of football clubs that they own. Same thing with the Manchester City Football Group, for example. They have a club in Japan, they have a club in Australia, England, America. They have a club all over. But so long as those clubs don't clash in terms of European competitions, the regulations in terms of the percentage of ownership they have, you can have a majority stake in a football club and still run another football club so long as you don't have links and you're not in the day-to-day operations of that club, if that makes any sense. So effectively, you can own two teams so long as you distance yourself from one of them and the funding comes from an external company. So, for example, same with Sheikh Jassim. If it was QSI's money that he's been stooged up with, just to give a scenario here, QSI have lent him billions of pounds to buy Manchester United. If he puts it through the 9-2 Foundation, and then the 9-2 Foundation's what then buys Manchester United, funds it, runs it, effectively, it's a third-party company, but your separation is the 9-2 Foundation. So the problem, like I say, with Sir Jim Ratcliffe is the legal battle, the Premier League scrutiny over the debt, and then also trying to pass it through UEFA because of the multi-club ownership laws. And unless the rules change within the next, I would say, month, Sir Jim Ratcliffe is still going to have the UEFA problem just as much as the other two problems. And I referred to it before. He's got a lot of headaches and not a lot of painkillers that he can take the pain away with in terms of the problems he's going to face in the long term if he were to try and buy Manchester United, even in a partial sales capacity.
So what do you think? And obviously, guys, for those watching, shout out to all those people, 70 plus people watching. Make sure you like the vid, and subscribe to the channel if you're new. We're almost, I think, about 10 subscribers away from a 3.7K. So please, if you haven't subscribed already, because I know quite a few of you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Get us to 3.7K and like the video if you're new as well. And obviously, if you have any questions as well in the chat, if you have any questions, please put them in chat. So what I guess I want to ask is that, so bear in that, like, all in mind, like what is do you feel the delay for the Glazers coming up to a decision currently? Is it that they are hoping that Sir Jim can come with a better deal, or do you feel like they're just kind of that you do feel like, you know what, I think that with all those complications, it's just easier that Sheikh Jassim might be that guy, and they just want to kind of figure out the best time to announce it. Like, what do you think? Like, if you had to put a bet on it, what do you think is the reason for the current hold up right now?
Current holder, honestly, because Joel and Avram have had reservations if they want to stay or not. That and I'll say that truthfully and honestly. I can sit here and I would tell every single person if you had to gamble on what Darcy's thinking, what Brian's thinking, what Edward's thinking, and what Kevin's thinking, the other four Glazer family members that have shares,
Yeah.
I would tell everybody now, any money that you have in your bank account, bet on them that they're willing to sell their shares because they are.
Yeah.
You bet everything that you own, and honestly, I would make people fortunes on here. I'd make everybody here multi-millionaires because that is the minds of the other four Glazer family. They wanted out 8 to 16 months ago with Apollo Investment. The deal collapsed, it didn't happen. Okay, they stay in. The only scenario now is the time that Manchester United was put on sale, because they didn't have the Glazer family didn't have the protection of Champions League football. At the time, there was a necessity to sell because if Manchester United fell short of getting Champions League football this season, the Champions League money that would have come into the football that they wouldn't have got coming into the football club, sorry, if they weren't to have qualified, would have then hampered how they run the club day to day because they don't have the finances in place then to sustainably run Manchester United, A, through the transfer market, and B, to still sustainably update Manchester United and update, say, the training ground, for example. There's a couple of redevelopments that's happening at the academy side of the training ground. There wouldn't be these sort of investments and these sort of projects happening currently right now if it weren't to have happened under what the Glazer family are wishing to do so. So the process being slowed down is Joel and Avram's minds, as I've said before, those two have already spoken out in terms of Sir Jim Ratcliffe gave them what they wanted twice. You get money here and now, you two can stay, or all six of you can stay, but we want the controlling stake of Manchester United. That's Sir Jim Ratcliffe's proposal, and we'll buy you all out in 2 to 4 years. But, as they say, there's the legal challenge, there's the legal battle with that. And in terms of the legal battle, it could become a massive story if it's not accurately described and proven by Sir Jim Ratcliffe to propose a full buyout at the accurate numbers. And if he doesn't provide the accurate numbers of what he values Manchester United at, and he doesn't stick to those rules to then buy the Glazer family out, or the Glazer family want to move the goalposts on him, he then, and the Glazer family, would manipulate the market and become, as I say, liable to lawsuits, which, as I said, has been quoted last time, could be millions pushing towards billions of US dollars. And the lawsuit sort of throwback to Sir Jim Ratcliffe, the Glazer family being undecided, it's very unlikely that Sir Jim Ratcliffe is able to make a fresh bid. And the only way he can do something about what he's done right now in terms of his offer is if he renegotiates the terms of percentage he wishes to buy, or he renegotiates the share type, meaning he doesn't buy the Class B shares, which have 10 times the voting rights of Class A and gives him control of the football club. He buys Class A, and he's just an investor who pumps money into Manchester United, but the Glazer family still run the football club, which I think for a lot of Manchester United fans is everybody's worst nightmare, really. And at the end of the day, in terms of the share types, and if he wishes to change, he could potentially buy shares for which has no control and gives him no say in what happens over the football club, for which he's never wanted throughout the whole process.
Yeah, of
so
course, yeah.
ultimately and overall, there is a lot of factors. The Glazer family haven't had that offer to come on the table to say, well, we're prepared to fully sell. They have had a proposal that's caught their eye and they've been prepared to go with twice, and they'd already made their mind up twice upon. But Sheikh Yassim's always kept bidding. So what do you always do with somebody who keeps preparing to bid and bid and bid? Well, you keep going. You keep persisting. But now you've got to a point where you've aggravated the person who's putting more money on the table to the point where he's put the offer on the table and he's run for the hills. And he said, if you want to accept that offer, you're going to be doing the legwork. You're going to be contacting me and my delegation because we've been contacting for updates and regarding the process and what's actually going on via Rain and via the Glazer family directly, but nothing is happening. We've had no communication, no dialogue, and no timeline or transparency. So why should we put the legwork in when you're not giving us anything to feed off of? They've put the final offer in, and that's that. And at the end of the day, now, from what we saw last week with the I can't remember what media company it was at. I think it was Routers, was it, or Routers? I can't remember what it was. The business the business organizational website. Routers, yeah. They put the terms out around that Qatar was negotiating exclusivity and things like that. The British media now and a lot of the journalists are now starting to report in favour of Sheikh Jassim's improved offer over Sir Jim Ratcliffe. And as I say, the only thing that Sir Jim Ratcliffe's got really right now.
I have a question about that when you finish, but yes, sorry.
The only thing that Sir Jim Ratcliffe, as I say, that he can do is he changes the percentage of shares which he wants, but he can't change that much because he's already really at the very minimum as to what he can do in terms of the percentage of shares that he can drop to, but he still has control over the football club should he buy those shares. But ultimately and overall, as I say, the Glazer family have always come into this process and the insistence has been, if we get the right money we're looking for, we're all selling. It's as simple as that. But Sir Jim Ratcliffe knew coming into this, he didn't have the finances in place because, as I said, he had $5 billion to bid with. That was not going to be enough to buy all of Manchester United. Therefore, what do you do if you want to get an advantage on your competitor? You undercut their valuation of what the club is at 100%, and you stick it on a ridiculous price at half the price of the actual business that you're wanting. And you overvalue what 50% is worth of that business. That's how you do it. But now, Sir Jim Ratcliffe has really come unstuck because Sheikh Jassim has now bidded more so or near enough closest to what Sir Jim Ratcliffe is bidding, overpaying for 50%, but Sheikh Jassim's overpaying then for the whole 69%, and then a further commitment to the other 31% of majority stakeholders, for which, from what I hear around the sort of US investment group that is willing to sue Sir Jim Ratcliffe should his proposal be put through, the noise is coming from the investment groups and from minority stakeholders via New York stock exchanges. They want a full sale. They would rather Manchester United be fully sold out, and then the group that buys Manchester United out fully and takes it as a private organisational company and off of the New York Stock Exchange, they then get a big payout. That benefits them more so than Sir Jim Ratcliffe staying in and still listing it via New York Stock Exchange because they don't get any money from that. The only people that see the proceeds is the Glazer family.
Of course.
And it gives them more concerns and problems because, as I say, they can't accurately value their shares, and you can't then sell your shares if you don't know what the value of your shares are worth. You're getting problems, and you're getting nothing back for your buck, really.
No, I completely agree with it. And speaking of, because I'm sure Jamie and even Lucky Singh in the chat will attest to this. And obviously, for those who are watching, 100+ women watching, guys, get those likes up. Come on. This is quality journalistic content that you won't find anywhere else. So get those likes up. So just going on from what you said about the reaction in the British media that they obviously are now going for Sheikh Jassim. Do you feel like that is, and obviously as a journalist yourself, so do you think that is actually genuine, or is it because, to keep it a stack, Athletic and various outlets were very much pro Sir Jim, Manchester United, Manchester United, etc., and were very, really anti Sheikh Jassim. And it's fair enough; people have their own preferences, but the bias was clear. Do you think that, part of the reason why the journalists are turning is because they kind of realize that there's a good chance that Sheikh Jassim may actually win, and they want to kind of garner favor with him should he win, and obviously get like exclusivity to interviews and things and stuff like that as well. Or do you just think that or do you think that maybe just simply that like some of these journalists know that Sir Jim is going to sort of get it, and they just kind of or they feel that Sir Jim is not actually as good as they think? I mean, what do you think about the whole reaction of the British press to Sheikh Zim versus Sir Jim, that type of thing?
Yeah. I think the biggest sticking point for a lot of journalists is access. That's a big thing to journalists. If you don't have access to the club that you're employed to have access to, that's a big problem. For example, you could have a scenario where you have these journalists that come out and publicly denounce you as an individual or scrutinize your bid, saying, you're using blood money, you're using money that goes on weapons or war and stuff that goes on, within the Gulf regions that Qatar, as a government, have involvements in. We're not, you can't hide away to the facts of that. Same thing with the human rights and the actual pay, the pay and the living conditions of migrant workers within their country. It was heavily documented over the World Cup. But the only thing you can state around Sheikh Jassim is he insists throughout, I'm a private individual. Just because I have a Qatari passport and a Qatari nationality shouldn't make me ineligible to buy a football club, because it's only like you're buying another business in another country. And some of whom these journalists, as news outlets and papers, are funded by, Middle Eastern monies or, cruelty of regimes. For example, the Independent newspaper is funded via Saudi Arabian money, but also Russian money, as a news article and a news outlet. But the journalists that speak on that platform speak out against those sort of regimes owning football clubs. For example, the Independent was completely, heretical in terms of scrutinising Roman Abramovich as an owner, saying, the sort of money that he brought into the league, he, was buying silence. He was pretty much, running interference for Vladimir Putin, which you can take it for what it is. It's a different scenario. But with Manchester United and Sheikh Jassim, the big thing for journalists is if you don't have access to the football club. So, for example, you don't go to if you're put on a blocker or your news, the company that you work for and the newspaper that you work for is blocked from reporting on Manchester United in terms of you're not allowed in the press room, you're not allowed to ask the manager a question, you're not allowed to, it will then impact the sort of sources that you get from inside the club if you then have a reshuffle in terms of members of staff, people who situate in board meetings, if there's shuffles there, you won't be able to get a lot of information out of Manchester United. And really, that's what, us journalists, we feed off of. We feed off of sources, information, and groundwork, really. And Sheikh Jassim, really, from the mantra of he's a very private guy, he doesn't, how can I say it? He's not very in the public eye. He's not a common knowledge, in terms of he's got these, he's a multi-billionaire according to form, in terms of he's trying to buy a football club, but he's got a really low, spotlight in terms of the public eye. And for what we know really around him, the overall consensus is he's a private guy. He keeps himself to himself. And, sometimes that's just how people are, and that's how they live their lives. You respect them for what they do. But at the end of the day, with Sheikh Jassim, if he wants to run Manchester United privately, you could have a situation then where when Manchester United go in for a player, it might not become public knowledge to the media until the player's actually holding up the shirt or there's a sighting of that player at Carrington training ground. You could have situations such as that where any leaks that are in, the club or the dressing room suddenly get plucked out by having a complete reshuffle at the training ground and at the football club. And at the ultimate, end of it all, really, you don't normally come into a situation like this. The one thing that I've always known with people from the Middle East is when they want something really badly, and if they're ever prepared to overpay for something, they always end up getting what they're overpaying for. And the best reasoning that I can use for that is the Qatar World Cup. They had, at the time when they was bidding for the World Cup, I think they had one stadium, and it was like 30,000 capacity. It was nothing at all. which was never going to be good enough to host a World Cup. So they had insufficient stadiums to run a World Cup, insufficient transport to transport fans around the World Cup, and insufficient accommodation facilities to actually accommodate football fans. But the British bid that was on the table had all of those things. The US bid that was on the table had all of those bids. You also had the South American offer that was on the table as well, that could have accommodated all of those things I've just mentioned. But Qatar still won the World Cup. And then they pledged, I think it was upwards of 150, 180 billion pounds or dollars, I can't remember the figures, into the infrastructure and building up the country to host the World Cup in the 12 years' time after they actually won the official bid. From there, as we say, they've already owned a football club in Paris Saint-Germain. They've, pledged a lot of money and investments in many business ventures and, projects, not in just in their own country, but in the world. And, I look at some of these journalists and at the end of the day, if you're going to scrutinise, somebody for buying a football club, do your research as a journalist on the sort of things that they invest in. For example, you walk to your local supermarket, that might be a Sainsbury's. You best not walk in there ever again because it's Qatar funds Sainsbury's as a company and a brand. But that's against everything that you think about. You want to go and set up a bank account. What's your nearest bank account in your local town or your city that you live in? Barclays Bank. All right, I'll walk into Barclays. No, you can't be doing that. Barclays is owned by, or it has a major investment in by the Qatari government. Oh, right. You want to, really, you want a new car. You've got a bit of an old modelling car. You want something brand new. You see a Volkswagen advertised. Oh, I want that car. It's my dream car. I love it. You go to Volkswagen, you best walk out of there. Qatar back Volkswagen as a company. So the morals that a lot of these journalists are putting out there are not morals in terms of the information that they receive, but it's their opinion. But you don't put it in a newspaper what your opinion is. That's what social media is there for. If you want to put your own opinion on what you think against the Qatari bid and scrutinise them and, for human rights and things like that, by all means, be my guest, go ahead. But it wasn't so long ago you had premium hospitality, flown out, paid for, looked after, catered for. You went to all the different matches within Qatar for their World Cup that they'd personally invited you to come and report on for your news outlet, for your company. But then 3 months later, you scrutinise, 3-4 months later from the World Cup, you're scrutinising somebody from that country who wants to buy a football club. It's hypocritical. It really is. So at the end of the day, if you're gonna come up with an opinion, be sustained and be balanced on what your opinion is. Because if Saudi Arabia win the World Cup, quoting for 2030, and these journalists still work for these newspapers now and then, I don't want to be seeing any of them journalists go to Saudi Arabia then. Because the sort of things that they report in that country, it's a rogue state, public executions, human rights abuses within that nation, yada, yada, and so on. This is what the reportings are. And journalists say these things about another country, which is a neighbouring country to Saudi Arabia. So you can't be going to its neighbour then, can you? Really? And it's even worse than the one that you're actually currently scrutinising right now. But the same backlash wasn't there for Newcastle. The same backlash wasn't there for Roman Abramovich when he came into the league. And the same morals and principles that you have in terms of Manchester United having a potential Qatari takeover, you're not scrutinising Manchester City for in terms of their ownership, in terms of the human rights there. So, it's okay to say it for one thing, but if you're going to say it for one thing, call it out on all levels, not be sustained in the one principle. And the only thing I can summarise in terms of that and your question, G, is the one thing that all these state-run football clubs or state-backed football clubs, I guess, is Newcastle, a historical club in terms of the Premier League, but Europeanly, there isn't that attraction to Newcastle as a football club. Manchester City, before they was bought, there wasn't the attraction in the Premier League or Europeanly. PSG, exactly the same thing in the French league. They wasn't a brilliant club. They wasn't a well-known name in France, let alone in Europe. All of these European clubs that have been bought out by states or state-backed money, they've never had a history behind them. It's never been a club that's won without the money, effectively, or won without that interference from a state. But suddenly you have a club in Manchester United that has the history and legacy, both domestically and Europeanly, who could potentially be bought out by that. And the only thing is, they would have to spend maybe 2 years, sustainably run Manchester United, clear the debt off, and suddenly it's an even playing field. Manchester United would compete with Manchester City for the Premier League year after year after year after year after year. And if Newcastle put the investment up over the couple of years, they'll join the conversation. And suddenly then you're going to have it a case of where every single league in football really will have 2, maybe 3 state-owned football clubs.
Yeah.
But as we say, and as I always, summarize around Middle East ownership of football clubs, there's only a handful states within the Middle East that actually see that as a good investment of their money. Some nations and countries, they either don't see the investment logistics of it, or they don't need to do it because they don't have any things, if you like, to cover over, or maybe sports wash over. For example, you have it with Qatar, with PSG, Saudi Arabia, Newcastle, Abu Dhabi City. You could have a situation. There was rumors and links around Bahrain wanted to buy into a football club at some point in time. They have the Formula One there. They want to have major sports, events within Bahrain at some point as a country. But ultimately and overall, the government at the time didn't see fit to invest in football. And some countries that, and nations, they look at it from that perspective. But ultimately and overall, the whole platform of it stinks, really, from a lot of journalists, because you were over there, having your Christmas or whatever in Qatar, and, singing their praises about the hospitality and everything. As soon as you step back off the plane back in the UK, you're on Twitter blowing up, or you're on your news article writing up a report about, the bad-mannered service, or the migrant workers, the different things like that. But you didn't think to interview any of these migrant workers while you were there, living it up, doing whatever you were doing in a 5-star hotel in Qatar. Like, have some humanity, I guess, about it.
Of course. Yep. No, of course, absolutely. Of course, Tom. And thanks for saying what I think a lot of people and fans are thinking regarding the sort of journalistic coverage of the Qatari bid, potential ownership of Manchester United Football Club. So what do you obviously, and guys, obviously for those obviously watching, if you have questions for Tom, please put them into the chat. And then obviously we'll get to, if you have any specific questions for Tom, we might briefly just touch on transfers towards the end. So I guess my other question kind of going into this is just I guess because we've obviously talked about Sir Jim already and the danger of the deal and its age to the Glazers and what have you. So I guess let's kind of pivot back somewhat to sort of Sheikh Jassim, and maybe ask a similar question: is that, do you feel like, again, part of the delay potentially is that could there be potentially issues with Sheikh Jassim's bid, offer, etc., as to why that's not being spearheaded or processed? Because we know Sir Jim has his issue, but has a lot more issues. But are there potential issues with Sheikh Jassim's bid regarding exclusivity, etc., that potentially could cause issues going forward?
Well, I think yes is probably the answer to that question, but I think the big sticking point for him would be the links to QSI's ownership of Paris Saint-Germain Football Club. I think straight away, any football fan, a rival, a Manchester United fan, even your local, shopkeeper, if they were interested in football and they knew how it works and the logistics of it, you would straight away point out and say, well, Sheikh Jassim's a Qatari international, and QSI, which is the sporting arm of Qatar's sovereign wealth fund, QIA, owns Paris Saint-Germain Football Club. So it's easy to point the finger towards that in terms of the separation. But the one thing I've always known from the very start when Sheikh Jassim entered the process was the message that was relayed from his camp had always been, if we didn't think we could pass it through, we wouldn't have entered the process. And if we didn't suffice to have the separation in place from QSI, we wouldn't have entered. It's as simple as that. And due to the development regarding Sir Jim Ratcliffe and the actual legal implications he could have for his offer, it's a massive gain towards Sheikh Jassim's bid. And, of course, there's going to be, scrutiny, as I say, over PSG's ownership via QSI and human rights. However, it's scrutiny that doesn't have any backlash. It doesn't have a lot of weight to it, really, in terms of blocking any takeover or involve as I say, financial legal battle, because there isn't any legal case to answer to. But because he's made it very clear what he wants to do with the shares in terms of New York Stock Exchange, I'll buy the 100% of it and take it as a private company. But I guess to quote, the latest development really regarding the Premier League's Premier League clubs voting in a motion of a rule change over using leverage buyouts, it means obviously that any potential buyer would need to move the debts that they are using for a takeover, either to make it liable to themselves or a company foundation, for which, as I say, the debt isn't a problem. So that sticking point around Sheikh Jassim with the Premier League is something that he would pass with flying colours, because he's removing the debt straight away. That's not an issue. It's gone. As soon as I buy the club or within weeks of ownership, I'm going to remove the debt straight away. No problem. So the clarity is there already, because he's made it public around the clarity of that. In terms of ultimately and overall the Premier League owners and directors test, as far as I'm aware, you still have state football clubs that are in the Premier League currently right now, don't you? You have, as they say, Saudi Arabia at Newcastle. You have Abu Dhabi at City.
Yeah, you do, yeah.
You had Roman Abramovich at Chelsea, and if there wasn't the Ukraine-Russia war, he probably would still be here. So you already have state money within the Premier League. So the scrutiny around it in terms of he's a private individual, really to the Premier League, if it's a state-backed bid or a private individual bid, there isn't really a case to answer to. You have state money in the league already, so bringing more of that money in is really going to boost the Premier League, because you have further financing. And that club then, in terms of the funding that's behind them, would attract better players to the league, which means better TV rights and better commercial gains for the Premier League and for Richard Masters. Therefore, it's better to have the money come into your league than go to a competitive league, essentially, if it was to go elsewhere. And ultimately and overall, the existing debt, as I say, that's already on Manchester United will stay unless a new owner has a plan on what they're willing to do with it. As we say, Sheikh Jassim would clear it instantly or within weeks. In Ineos's case, the existing debt, the conversation for some months had been that they were willing to take a portion of the debt and move it onto Ineos, but we didn't know how much of the portion it was. All of it, some of it, the 1% of it. We don't know, because they've not been clarified on terms of that. But another point that was discussed via Ineos was a payment structure to pay all of the existing debt off over 5 years. And the latter process that I've just alluded to there, in terms of a payment structure, is probably more likely due to the velocity of the finances that it's going to take just to buy Manchester United outright in a long-term buyout for 3-4 years. But then you've also got to manage the debt alongside buying out the other shares of the Glazer family, alongside potentially a legal battle. And this is where I'm alluding to with it, that Sir Jim Ratcliffe's got more headaches than he has painkillers to take the pain away. Because the deeper this gets for Sir Jim Ratcliffe, the more and more difficult it is for him. And from a source that, we spoke to about 3 months ago regarding passing any takeover, the message that was always relayed back to us was the Ineos takeover of Manchester United will take longer and could be blocked due to their ownership of OGC Nice. If Ratcliffe and Ineos didn't own Nice, he would have a lot less of a problem right now. But because he does, and he can't distance himself from it, that's the problem. And in Sheikh Jassim's case, so long as he can create the separation between himself, QSI being the sporting arm of QIA, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and that no financials involved in the takeover are state linked, then the Premier League will be fully satisfied to pass them as a group and organisation based upon the grounds of it's a private individual or foundation bid, not a state backed offer. But the US sources that we've been using, claimed that the Rain Group had insisted, and as I reported a couple of streams ago, there was influence over the Sheikh Jassim offer. For example, Nasser Al Khalifi had words home and words, went around certain nationals and so forth, and it ended at Sheikh Jassim's desk. You can look into that for what you will. But, however, in an advisory capacity, if that's all that it is, and not a financial capacity, then it's irrelevant. For which, what we know is that Sheikh Jassim, with making his bids and offers, he's been using his own financials, according to form. His father, HBJ, former Prime Minister of Qatar, has been supporting his bid, both vocally and financially. And as far as what I'm aware, there is others. There's other unnamed net worth individuals within Qatar, some of whom are being reported to have had state links or, have worked within the government of Qatar before or closely to the royal family, but no longer have any senior roles or involvement, which is much like Sheikh Jassim's father, HBJ, for which he was the ex-prime minister, which is a lot bigger scale to some of these others. So all in all, the media have been painting this Qatar offer as being a state-backed offer and that it wouldn't be made and it wouldn't make it through the Premier League. Really, from the quoting that had been described to myself was, it's an agenda-built myth. That is really what the media have portrayed here. Their own agenda, put a bit of spin on it, and build it so that it has a bit of weight to it. That's all they can do. But the problem is, the weight doesn't sink to the bottom of the ocean. It just floats because it's not heavy enough. And that's the problem. You don't have enough evidence to sustainably bury Sheikh Jassim's offer. So what have you got to do now? Because you're thinking that he might win, and it's looking more likely that he will win, you get on board. As they always say, it's never too late to jump ship. And a lot of these journalists now, let's be honest, they're doing that, aren't they?
Fair enough, Tom. Thank you so much, and thanks for the thanks for the update. I know we're almost into an hour now, so I think as we just begin to first this question, just a clarification. Tom, isn't QSI and QIS separated, and also isn't Sheikh Jassim part of QIA or something like that?
Well, QIA is the Qatar Investment Authority. That's what it stands for. Now, QIA is the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Qatar. It's Qatar's version of Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, PIF. That's what it is, essentially. QSI is Qatar Sports Investments, which is the sporting venture and project which is led by Nasser Al Khalifi, who's QSI's executive and also PSG president, for which bought Paris Saint-Germain Football Club and is owned by QSI. QIA funds QSI, essentially. So you have it where QIA is the, as I say, Sovereign Wealth Fund, which has shares and investments in Sainsbury's, Barclays, all these different groups and organisations in businesses. And then from there, any of the different ventures that they're willing to go down. So, for example, pump billions of pounds into QSI and you build a new stadium for Paris Saint-Germain. You buy the best players that's in the world. They bought Neymar, Messi, Mbappe, buying the best players in the world, stick them in a team, build the brand, build the football club, and then you build your revenues. So essentially, QIA and QSI are separate in terms of their goals, but they're the same in terms of the funding that's used between the both of them. QIA funds QSI, and whatever QSI does is funded by QIA. So anything that happens from QSI as a group and an organisation has to have influence by the Qatari state and government, because that's their sovereign wealth fund for which funds QSI, essentially. So in a two-part question, they are separate in terms of their goals, but they're not separate in terms of who runs them.
Thanks for the clarification, Tom. That makes a lot of sense. Before we get into just a little bit of transfer talk, because I appreciate that we're almost going for an hour now. Like, do you think that, like, do you think we're going to hear something soon, Tom? I mean, with the journalists, like I said, going to Sheikh Jassim, with all the roast reports, like, do you think we're going to hear something, anything that at least some sort of exclusivity period, or like, and if so, like when? Because obviously United fans are suffering, man. They really are, you know.
Yeah. You know, the one thing is, journalists have set a deadline after deadline after deadline. Like, the way that I had understood it from the very start was, you're going to have 3 bidding rounds, and you get to the 3rd bidding round, the Glazer family take a week, and then they're going to decide on a preferred bidder. You know, they had decided to JIM Ratcliffe, but they gave Sheikh Jassim an ultimatum to say, Sir Jim's our guy, we're going with him unless you bid again. He bid a 4th time. The Glazer family went to Nasser Al Khalifa, wanted him to get involved and play a middleman role. He wasn't willing to do it personally, but you make a few phone calls, you speak to a couple of people at home, right? Get Sheikh Jassim to bid again. He bid again. Bid a 5th time. 5th and final offer. Take it or leave it. I'm not negotiating it. You do the legwork. You come to me if you want a deal and do an offer. That's it. And the Glazer family, as I say, if this was up to the other 4 siblings, this would have been wrapped up months ago. I would have probably said the deadline that a lot of journalists were giving fans of, you know, late April, early May, was probably a true testament deadline. If it was just if Joel and Avram had no influence and no shares in Manchester United, I think the 4 siblings would have sold already by now. Because I don't think they would have. I don't think you can do a worse job than what Joel and Avram have done in terms of leading this process from the Glazer family side of things. Because truly and honestly, they have done a piss poor job. It's completely, you know, low, stooping, and you even have this situation now where you have rival fans who are even sympathising with Manchester United in terms of how long does it take for somebody to make their mind up, you know. And the only thing and clarification I guess you can give these people is it's billions of pounds that you're dealing with, and you're going to want to make sure that you're not going to regret your decision in, you know, later down the line, or, you know, going through processes, or, you know, over time.
Considering that they didn't actually put any of their actual money into buying Manchester United, I just find it absolutely perplexing that these people who, fair enough, if they actually used their own family money wealth to actually buy Manchester United, invest in it, but they leveraged the debt against the club, put the debt on the club to buy the club, and they have the audacity to say, oh, hey, we're not 100% sure yet about how many, like, you're making, you know, they bought United for, was it 500 million, I think, something like that, something along those lines.
I think it was 700 at the time.
700, okay.
But they've only ever put 200 million pounds of their own money in.
You know, so, you know, and you're selling it for, and potentially argue making to be the most expensive buy of any club ever. And
but it will be, yeah.
Excess, and it will be. You know, so it's like, what position are you in? Like, you're so greedy that you're like, even though we basically barely put any of our money into the club, and we're going to be making billions of profit from doing a piss poor job, you still have the I don't get it. I don't get it at all. You know. So,
the one thing that the Glazer family have that they didn't have when they opened the process in November was they had a mini time frame, really, in terms of they was in a way they had to sell if they wanted to get the best price for a full sale at the time, because they didn't really have an option to stay. So the problem with the Glazer family at the time was they didn't have the finances in place to sustainably run Manchester United because they weren't making profits and revenues at the time because Manchester United was making a loss, not a profit. And also, a lot of the sponsorship deals, like you had Richard Arnold who went down the pub to speak to the United fans, the sponsors were pulling out. They wanted to renegotiate contracts or terms, and they weren't willing to give Manchester United a lot of money to sponsor them as a brand on Manchester United shirts, which is a massive issue commercially. So ultimately and overall, the Glazer family's problem surrounding it in terms of they didn't have the option to pull the whole plug on the whole thing. Right now, because they have Champions League football, and this could be leading to the point of why they didn't make a decision before the end of the season, is because of the fact of they didn't know if they could stay one more year or not. If they got Champions League football, the money that you get from the Champions League prize money and the TV rights, it would make the Glazer family eligible, and it would give them the finances to stay for one more year if they wish to do so. Okay. So now that they have that and they have the Champions League football to cover their ass, if they then want to go on and then still own Manchester United for another year, if they look at this Jim Ratcliffe offer and they think, nah, he's not offering us enough money, they look at Sheikh Jassim's offer and think, well, that's his final offer. Nah, that's not enough money. They can pull the plug on this. And with how the Glazer family are about money and about wealth, honestly, it's probably the most Glazer family thing that they could ever do. Really, you have billions of pounds at the table, but you still pull the plug on it because it's not enough. That's the only thing that really makes sense around the Glazer family in terms of how they think. If they think that they can get another £1 billion, well, they're going to pull the plug on the whole thing, and they'll wait another year. Or you could still have a situation where you still have interested parties. So Jim Ratcliffe and Sheikh Jassim could still be interested, but you just have the situation as to where the groups would still be bidding and bidding and bidding and bidding. And as I say, the Glazer family wanted 5 or 6 competitive groups to be bidding against each other. And they didn't get that. They got one, which they already knew about with Sir Jim, because they always known that he's been interested for years. And then they got a Qatari sheikh from absolutely nowhere that they had no clue of, they'd never met, they'd never heard of, they'd never even spoken to until they made direct contact with him to even just make sure that he was even real, because he had barely any coverage in terms of online communication or actually him, socially. There wasn't a lot of information out there regarding him. When he was linked to by Manchester United Football Club, Wikipedia had to do their research to make their own page on him. That's how little that anybody knew about this individual buying Manchester United Football Club. And as I say, in terms of a time frame, look, this can take, weeks and weeks on end. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's going to be done within a matter of, weeks. You could have a situation where the ownership of Manchester United doesn't change until the very start of next season. And what I mean by that is because the Glazer family still haven't made their mind up and decided yet over which way they want to turn, so Jim or Sheikh Jassim, as I say, the Premier League still have to investigate where the funds come from and what's going to happen with debt. And then if there is any sort of external factors, human rights abuses and so forth, if it's state-backed, and same thing with Sir Jim Ratcliffe in terms of, greenwashing, the pollution sort of saga that would be thrown at him. So you do have different pointers there. You then have UEFA in terms of multi-club ownership. Is Sheikh Jassim linked to QSI? Sir Jim Ratcliffe and ineos, what are you doing with Nice Football Club? We need clarity on that. So, and then as I say also with Sir Jim, there's the problem with the New York Stock Exchange and a potential legal battle. So the longer that the Glazer family decide upon what they want to do, and as I've always reiterated and alluded to, you ain't even halfway there. And until they decide somebody is their preferred bidder or they want to negotiate with exclusively, until they do so, when they actually do so, I'll come in here and say, right, you're at the halfway stage of a takeover. You pass it through the Premier League, right, there's 15%. You're at 65. You pass it through UEFA, right, there's another 15%. You're at 80%. Oh, right, you need to finance the deal, right, 10%. Get the lawyers involved, sign on the dotted line, there's the other 10%, right, takeover done, announce it. And that's the other 10%. You
Mm.
are not even halfway through this whole saga. And there's a lot of more swings and motions still to come yet. Because as I say, there can always be a situation where you have a problem with, Sheikh Jassim in terms of the offer and the Qatari state. You could also have a situation with Sir Jim Ratcliffe with Nice. So there is problems and situations for the two ownership groups. Whomever is to engage with the Glazer family, there is a situation and a problem there. But ultimately and overall, we have to wait and see. But if honestly, if there wasn't an announcement or there wasn't an indication within 2 weeks, really, I think these groups, they have the money to go and buy another football club if they wanted to. And I think really in 2 weeks' time, if they don't hear anything back or any indication that it's them or it's the other group, I think one of them will pull out. And as I said before on the last stream, just to summarise, if the Glazer family, if it wasn't to be made as a public announcement, normally the first group that speaks normally speaks because they pull out and they withdraw their offer. And if you have a situation where there's rumours that a group's looking at pulling out, or they have pulled out, or they're leaving their offer on the table and withdrawing from the race, then you have a situation where whomever the other party is most likely to be picked. And that's why, in terms of takeovers, whoever speaks first is a bad indication as to what's actually going to happen to them as a group. So if there was a situation where Sheikh Jassim was to be the selected one or the chosen one from the Glazer family, I would be expecting to hear Sir Jim Ratcliffe's camp blow up, like as if they'd made a new bid. That sort of level of coverage and exposure, that's what I would be expecting. But the same points for Sheikh Jassim. You'd be expecting a big blowback in terms of if he's willing to pull out and walk away and do yada yada and so forth. But there hasn't been those indications that either party are pulling away. But I wouldn't put it past them with how long it's taken, because they could have already bought another club by now. If one of these parties was really interested and they didn't have a preference over the club itself, I think I think that Sheikh Jassim's group or Sir Jim Ratcliffe with Ineos, I think they could have bought Liverpool by now. Liverpool were on the sale at the same time as Man United. One of these two groups, I think, could have done a deal with FSG by now. Or probably even been the owners by now, really. But Manchester United is the bigger appeal and the bigger brand. So I guess in hindsight, when you think about what I've just said in terms of bigger brand and bigger, model, really you're going to have to wait a bit more time to then get that. And I think these groups, they're prepared to wait, but they're not going to wait forever. So the Glazer family, they need to make a decision. And if there wasn't any movement within 2 weeks, I very much fear for the future of Manchester United Football Club in terms of an ownership change, because I think one of these parties will pull out.
No, and that's fair enough, especially if they feel like the time's been wasted. So finally, just sort of rounding up, obviously, we'll talk a bit about transfers now. But I know the likes of Fabrizio and Ornstein didn't necessarily confirm, but you can see obviously the fact that it looks like Kim Min-jae is probably heading towards Bayern Munich. You're seeing a lot of Manchester United targets, obviously not in for Harry Kane, and although Højlund wants to come to United, the price is too high. Different things like that affecting Manchester United's transfer window, and also obviously this specifically driven by the takeover. Do you think there's any and obviously Mason Mount for goodness knows how much? I don't know, 50 million, 60 million. I've got no idea. So I guess my question first to Tom is are any of the links, that I kind of mentioned, substantial and kind of solid? And then the second part of that question is, how do you feel that this takeover saga is going to affect the transfer window going forward into next season?
Well, really, the point that we're at in terms of the transfer window for Manchester United right now, if you had to stick a blame on it, you would blame the ownership for letting it get to this point. You would blame the recruitment team because they don't negotiate deals properly. and the sort of packages that they pay players in wages, but also pay clubs a premium price to get a player. And then also, really, you have to blame the whole situation as a whole based upon how Manchester United is set up as a structure. Because, as you say, you come into a transfer window with your key targets. Whenever Manchester United go into a transfer window, they always have one number one signing. Many football clubs that operate at the highest level have 2 or 3 players that they want. And those 2 or 3 players are big, big players, big name priorities. For example, Arsenal came into the transfer window. They were looking at Declan Rice. They were looking at Caicedo. And they were, I can't remember the other player they was looking. I think they were looking at, I can't remember if it was Kim Min-jae or Yurian Timber, who might be actually going to Arsenal. They were looking at 3 big profile players. One of them that they've pulled out of with Caicedo because they don't think that they're going to be able to afford both Caicedo and Rice, which you can understand. £100 billion players. In Manchester United's case, as you said with Kim Min-jae, you have a situation where, as a club, you're restricted in terms of the wages that you can offer that player for the full year because you don't know what's going to happen with the takeover, because you can't preempt a decision of the future without actually knowing what a decision is from the Glazer family. So if you're in Kim Min-jae's shoes, you have a release clause that comes up in a couple of weeks. You might want to come to Manchester United, as it's been reported. But if Bayern Munich come in and they offer you a contract that suffices you to move when your release clause is activated, they would also give you a bigger wage package than what Manchester United can offer you right now. And also they can give you the safety and security that that contract can be fulfilled because they have a stable ownership. Well, the writing's on the wall. Bayern Munich can get the player better than Manchester United. And the one thing that I've always known with Manchester United is, under the Glazer family's ownership anyway, they don't ever like competing for a player. The one thing that I know with Manchester United is they don't ever see having to compete with other football clubs for players because they're Man United. We're Man United. We come knocking to buy a player. It should scare everybody else off. It should warn everybody else off. We're Man United. We'll flex his muscles. The Glazer family run the football club as if it's back at, in 99. You can buy whatever player in the world that you want. You can out-muscle football clubs for the best talents in the world. It doesn't happen like that. And why do you think whenever Manchester United go into a pursuit or a battle for a player, they never end up getting them? But the players of whom that you're unchallenged in getting, Mason Mount, for example, is the prime example. There's not another club that Mason Mount wants to go to other than Manchester United. So therefore, any other interest has been snubbed and doubted straight away. So Manchester United can sit around and wait for Chelsea to lower the asking price on Mason Mount. And really, it's a good stance from United because they're not getting ripped off for a player that's not worth £70 million with 1 year left in his contract. But there also isn't a clear structure in terms of, well, if we can't get the player, where do we go from there? And I think it's concerning, especially surrounding the midfielders, if Chelsea don't budge on that asking price and Manchester United aren't prepared to go to those lengths to get Mason Mount, I fear where Manchester United would sign another midfielder for, because Declan Rice is on the wall to go to Arsenal. Caicedo's on the wall to go to Chelsea. There's two of probably the most priority signing midfielders that Manchester United would try and get. Where you go from there, I really don't know. Apart from a free transfer, Rabiot, at the stretch, maybe a Sofian Amrabat, somebody like that. I mean, I'm clutching at straws here, just coming up with names for Manchester United. That's how bad of a problem that is, really. As you said, the striker situation. Harry Kane, for me anyway, speaking as a fan, I don't think it's I don't think it's dead. I just don't think Manchester United are willing to push Daniel Levy's buttons. You have your best player, your marquee player that you can get £80 to £100 million for. If Manchester United were a serious football club and they were serious about getting Harry Kane, you would go to Tottenham Hotspur and Daniel Levy and you would put £80 million as being quoted as Manchester United's max price they would pay for Kane, right here and now with 1 year left in his contract, you would go there, you would put that offer on the table, and you'd let Daniel Levy sit on it. And you do it as a take it or leave it. You get 80 million now, or we can speak to him for free in January and negotiate terms for him to come for free next summer. So ultimately and overall, the whole transfer structure, Manchester United want Mason Mount, but they want him at a set price, and they're not going. And it doesn't look like Manchester United are going to budge on that price. And as it stands right now, Chelsea don't really look like they're going to, budge on that price. And if they're selling a lot of these players like they are doing to Saudi Arabia, and they get decent wages off the bills, and also potentially get some money back for some of the players that they've actually selling, that strengthens their stance in terms of they can demand that price because they aren't as under much pressure to sell players that they've already sold. And then the FFP regulations aren't strangling them as people thought they were going to do so. And they were going to have to just sell players for whatever fee they could get. So Mason Mount, I guess, is a key one to keep your eye on. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I think Chelsea will end up budging down and doing a deal. And I think Manchester United might compromise and meet halfway with Chelsea. Because I think, it's a player that Erik ten Hag wants. Kim Min-jae, I think in a lot of Manchester United's eyes, was the centre-back that they wanted. Obviously, going to Bayern Munich, that changes things, really. I mean, if United probably didn't sign the Sandro Martinez, I would have said Jurrien Timber would have definitely been a target. However, it looks considerable that Arsenal, I think, have made an offer in the region of 30 to 35 million pounds for him. So I think it's very unlikely that you would buy both Timber and Martinez. And as much as, Jamie Carragher made the joke around Lissandro Martinez and his height at the start of the season, I don't think you can get away with two centre-backs being under 6 foot. Not in the Premier League, but, Axel Diassi of Monaco's a player that's in Manchester United's shortlist in terms of who they're looking at if they were to get a centre-back. But the shift that I've heard of anyway, from good sources within Manchester United, has been that they came into this window wanting a number 9, and they were prepared to spend a big portion of the budget that they had on that number 9, which was supposed to be Harry Kane. But if it's not Harry Kane, the money that they were going to use for Kane, they'd rather invest in other areas, in 3-4 areas around the squad, than invest in one player as a risk. And as a risk, that's why I look at players that say Kolo Muani, Højlund, if they want to demand a stupid fee for. If these sort of prices is what's being quoted, and these clubs don't change their stances on the price that they're putting on their players, Manchester United will invest the money elsewhere. So, for example, you could have a situation where you spend, let's say, 55 on Mason Mount. You might spend, a free transfer on Rabiot. That's two midfielders.
Is there any on what the transfer budget might be? Do you know anything about that?
In terms of right now, with how FFP is on Manchester United's arse, they have £100 million to spend.
Wow.
In terms of if they were to sell nobody. But if they raise funds and they raise cash, a successful window for United would probably be sell players for over £50 million. And the only real way that I could see that happening is you squeeze the living daylights out of a Harry Maguire to West Ham, Aston Villa for maybe 40. But I don't think it's going to happen. McTominay to Newcastle, maybe.
Dean Henderson, to be honest.
Dean Henderson's another one. But as you say with David De Gea, the situation regarding him is David De Gea wants to stay at Manchester United, and he's had a contract which he's willing to accept for 3 weeks on the table. But Manchester United have not signed off to release him that contract. And his contract expires very, very soon. I think within 10 days or, I think it's very minimum by the end of the month. So really, it's, the clock's ticking, and with how
I mean, if they don't sign off, I mean, presumably De Gea is a free agent. You can speak.
he is,
Well,
yeah.
speak to anybody.
Yeah. Of course. But the one thing with David De Gea is whenever he's had competition, he's never liked it. For example, when Louis van Gaal was at the football club, he dropped David De Gea for a couple of games, did he not? And
Yeah.
David De Gea kicked up a fuss about it. He wasn't happy. The rumours, he wanted to go to Madrid. It didn't happen. It fell through.
Mm-hmm.
You then had a situation. He stayed at the football club, signed a new contract. Louis van Gaal put him straight back into the squad. And, it was as if nothing ever changed or happened. You then have a situation in COVID lockdown. Dean Henderson comes back to Manchester United. He has competition. Dean Henderson had a good run-in of about 6 to 7 games where he played consistently ahead of David De Gea. And David De Gea kicked up a fuss about it. Went to the CEO, went to the director of football at the time, and insisted that, look, I've been a long-serving member of this football club. I've won things at this football club. Dean Henderson has won nothing but a promotion with Sheffield United. That's all that he's ever won. I've got a Premier League's medal. I've got FA Cups, Europa Leagues. I've got big moments, big, trophies and awards for this football club. Why am I not the number one? He got his way, kept number one again. And then the mistakes and the sort of, modern day football catching up with him has then really prolonged to Erik ten Hag looking at it and thinking, well, my priority number one was a centre forward, but if I can't get that, I want a goalkeeper then. And the goalkeepers that I know for a fact of at least 4 that are on the list that Manchester United are speaking to agents of. They're speaking to the agents of Andre Onana, Diogo Costa, Jordan Pickford, and David Raya, of whom the sort of listings, if Manchester United didn't sign a superstar number 9, I think Costa and Onana are probably the ones that Manchester United would target more so because of the experience and the pedigree that they have to develop. One of whom in Onana that Erik ten Hag's worked with before. So there is that relationship there. Otherwise, but it did turn stale at Ajax. But also you have a situation where if Manchester United make heavy investments elsewhere, you might have to go cheap on a goalkeeper, a David Raya, a Jordan Pickford. And whether that's to what Manchester United fans want or not, I mean, it's up for debate. But if the number 9's not there, and David De Gea contract isn't signed off probably within a week, I would struggle to see a scenario where Manchester United don't have a new number 9 at least in place before the start of the season.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that, Tom. So are you still there, Tom? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm still
there. Sorry. Thanks for the Tom. I appreciate. There was just another question that came up just briefly that I wanted to quickly. Joseph says, my question is, if the Glazers didn't want to sell, why are they the 2 parts waiting for a reply from the family? And I'll kind of paraphrase that in that surely we must be beyond the point that the Glazers are not contemplating not selling. We surely must be past the point in the sale process where, with how long it's been, with the fact that they are now what appear to be entertaining Sheikh Jassim's offer, know that he's going to increase bids, etc. Surely, the Glazers, whatever Avram and Joel think, they can't think that they're not going to be selling at least something. No? Or is there still a chance that they could be like, nah, screw this?
Well, as I said before, if the Glazers family don't get the money that they want, they have Champions League security, which gives them the finances to still stay for another year at least, for which you could then get a new sponsor in which brings more money. And then the Glazer family, really, they don't have to sell for a couple more years. And really, the Glazer family, and with Manchester United making Champions League football, it's aided the Glazer family to give them a negotiating tool to say, well, screw the lot of you if you want. If you don't give us what we want, then we can still stay. Sir Jim Ratcliffe, we don't have to take your proposal. We can run this football club ourselves. We can pick, and it's still not even out of the woods of that they could still pick a minority group. Elliott Investment, Oak Tree Capital, sell off a minority stake, a 15 to 20% maybe of their shares, still have the controlling stake, and they have financing and funding to build a new stadium, to invest it in Carrington, to modernise Manchester United as a football club, but they would still be running it, for which I don't think a lot of Manchester United fans would be happy doing so. So the scenario of what you've just said, have they come too far to not pick one? I think they have, really. Because as much as it would have wasted all the different parties' times, the Glazer family will have wasted their time, but also they've wasted their money hiring Rain, for which then they haven't used an option to actually buy or use them to sell the football club to either or of. So really, you have a situation where the Glazer family are really contemplating over which option to choose from, because they have three options, or four really, if you want to include not selling, Sheikh Jassim, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, or a minority group. And as I've said before, and I'll say again, the Glazer family don't have to sell. They have that option to not sell, because the security of Champions League football and the financing that gives them means they could stick around if they wanted to. But considering you have a proposal where you can still stay, but you don't have to run the football club, so it takes the pressure and the strain off of you and puts it on someone else, and you also get a stake in whatever the club's sold for in the future, or if your shares are to be bought out with Sir Jim Ratcliffe, or you get a big hefty payoff right here and now from Sheikh Jassim, and you all bow out and dine at the same table and get billions. You get that option. Or you can stay with a minority investor, or you can say screw every single offer that's in the process. It's not what we thought it was going to be, and move on and go elsewhere. But if I'm being completely honest, if I didn't think that they were going to choose an option, I think they would have pulled this weeks ago. If they, as the sellers, felt that they were being insulted with the offers that were on the table, or the sort of people that were at the table with what they were offering them, I think they would have pulled the plug a long time ago. And that's why I agree with what the viewer's comment was. I can't remember what his name was, and what you've just said, G, in agreement in terms of, I think they've come too far not to choose something. And really, any way that you look, if they were to sell a minority investment, they get money. If they were to sell a partial investment sale to Sir Jim Ratcliffe, they would get money. If they were to sell to Sir Jim Ratcliffe, to Sheikh Jassim, sorry, they would get money. So any option that they choose, they're going to get money from, for which the Glazer family have always insisted upon wanting. So any way that they look, they're getting money from. So if it suffices the Glazer family to leave because they get the money that they want, or they get what they want in terms of potentially staying, well, that's just what the Glazer family are going to do. They've always thought about themselves and not Manchester United Football Club. So at the end of the day, as I've always reiterated, there is still a scenario where the Glazer family pull the whole plug on it and say, screw the lot of you. We think that we can get more money later down the line. And if they think, and the message that was relayed from both camps in terms of Ineos and Sheikh Jassim, when those sort of rumours came out around about 2 months ago, that the Glazer family could pull the plug on it, the message relayed from the groups was, good luck to them. If they want to do that, good luck to them. Because you're going to be in this same situation, proposing a sale process in 3-4 years' time. The only difference is, we might own football clubs, and B, you might not have people out there that want to pay maybe £8 billion for the football club next time. But this is why with the Glazer family, you can never trust them, because you could literally ring Joel and Avram up and say, I'll offer you £6 billion. You could then get to a meeting where Joel and Avram are in front of you, you've got your legal team, their legal team, you're binding over the contract, and then they say, last minute, pull the goalpost on you.
Yeah.
One more thing. We want another $1 billion. We want 7 now.
Yeah.
And suddenly, you could aggravate a group to think, are you joking? We've agreed something set in stone. And this is why, unless you have it in black and white and it's signed on the dotted line, nothing is ever agreed or termed with the Glazer family. And until, the old phrase of, I'm never believing it until they're holding up the shirt, really, you can never believe it until the paperwork's signed. Because Newcastle, with PAF, was supposed to be taken over 2 years ago, and it didn't happen because of the Premier League's, laws against piracy and the illegal streaming of Premier League games within Saudi Arabia. And as soon as piracy was taken away, Newcastle was taken over by Saudi Arabia's public investment fund. So, at the end of the day, with the Glazer family, the only thing that I'm going to say is the price of modern day football, they've been priced out of it. And if Manchester United want to compete at the highest level, they need somebody who's willing to invest in the short term, at least, to make them a sustainable football club again, and then also let the finances that Manchester United generate run the football club day to day. And that's why I've always phrased Man United don't need a sugar daddy, but it would help in the short term because you would get Manchester United sustainable faster, which would then mean you compete with Manchester City, PSG, Real Madrid, Barcelona for the best players in the world for whatever price. And the last thing that ever Manchester United will worry about when they go for a player or negotiate for anybody, the last thing that Man United would ever worry about is the price. And that's the one thing that the Glazer family have always worried about when it comes to anything, is the price and the value of something. Whereas with a new ownership model, that's the last thing that they think about.
Fair. Well, thanks again for the update, Tom. Thanks again for some man. I really appreciate it. I think we're going to round up now. Obviously, guys, hopefully this week I'll actually be able to do I need to still do my United season review. I'll be posting some content on my second channel, Red Marvel, regarding movie reviews for latest Transformers and Flash movie as well as trying to increase my shorts channel. But like I said, if you are new to the channel, remember to like, share, and subscribe to Red Devil Studio. Follow us on Twitter and X. Follow us on Twitter and follow us on Twitter and Twitch. Links on the description. Make sure you check out Tom's Twitter handle at TomJournalist1. And I'm sure we will be back this week with another sales update. But yeah, for now, thanks again, Tom. Everyone in the chat for listening. Have a nice day, everyone. And cheers.
Yeah.
Peace.
Peace.